Objection, Your Honor. The resurrection was a special form of coming back from the dead. It was a permanent coming back from the dead. Unlike the miracle raisings from the dead, Paul is simply saying that Jesus was the first to be raised permanently from the dead, which would not contradict the gospel story. It's a fair enough objection, and one that I want to address immediately, so let me do that now. Even if we assume that Paul meant a resurrection from the dead to a permanent state of life, the idea still works for the Jesus myth theory in that Jesus still would have been the first to be brought back to life permanently if he had been killed at the time the world was created. But we don't have to stop here. The Greek word translated as resurrection is anastasis. If we look in a lexicon, we'll see that the main meaning of this word is a raising up, a rising, for example, from a seat. In Luke 2:34, we see the word translated as rising again, not resurrection. And Simeon blessed them and said unto Mary his mother, Behold, this child is set for the fall and rising again of many in Israel, and for a sign which shall be spoken against. To show that anastasis did not imply a dead person coming back to life, we need only find an example of the term resurrection of the dead, since if it meant a rising from the dead, adding of the dead would be redundant. It would be like saying a raising of the dead of the dead. In fact, we can find numerous examples of this in the resurrection chapter of 1 Corinthians, from the very lips of Paul himself. Now, if Christ be preached that he rose from the dead, how say some among you that there is no resurrection of the dead? Here are several other passages that use the phrase resurrection of the dead. And 1 Peter 1:3 clearly shows that even Jesus' own resurrection was not special regarding the word anastasis. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. This same phrase, resurrection from the dead, can be seen in many other passages of the New Testament. Here are just a few. If we replace the word resurrection with the word raising or rising, we get a better understanding in all cases. The word resurrection only seems to be special because most of the time in the New Testament, the translators used it when they knew the context was regarding dead people coming back to life. This is because the word resurrection, a word that did not exist prior to the 13th century, carried with it the connotation of raising from the dead. The word resurrection actually originated around 1290 CE and itself came from the Latin resurger, similar to resurgent, which simply meant rise again. The word resurrection became synonymous with dead people coming back to life, and as such, the King James translators of 1611 used the word whenever they felt that the text was speaking of a person rising from the dead. But even the KJV is inconsistent, as there are a few instances where the KJV translators did not use the word resurrection for the Greek anastasis, but instead used the word rising. The obvious reason the word rising or anastasis was used in conjunction with the dead coming back to life was that the dead were thought to reside in Sheol, or the grave, which was below ground level, and that is why the word anastasis is used so frequently, because the dead would naturally have to physically rise from Sheol in order to come back from the dead. Finally, to prove that the word had no special relation to Jesus' resurrection or the final resurrection, not to mention that it also had no sense of permanency, we shall look at a final example of a New Testament writer using anastasis in a way that clearly shows no special meaning other than rising up when regarding a person coming back from the dead. Women received their dead again by resurrection, anastasis, and others were tortured, not having accepted deliverance, that they might get a better resurrection, anastasis. A better resurrection? It sounds odd if you keep thinking that resurrection means someone coming back from the dead. Rid yourself of this false idea and replace it with the word rising, and you get the idea intended. This verse alludes to the raising of the widow's son found in 1 Kings chapter 17. The author of Hebrews refers to that miracle as a resurrection, an anastasis, a rising. This is the same word used throughout the New Testament in conjunction with Jesus' own rising from the dead. Did her son live forever after that just because the word anastasis was used? If the word anastasis means to come back from the dead permanently, then we have to believe her son never died after that. But we know that isn't true due to the second half of Hebrews 11:35. A better resurrection refers to the raising from the dead that would happen at the end of time, a permanent raising, unlike the temporary resurrection mentioned in the first half of the verse. The word translated as resurrection, anastasis, carries no connotation of permanency or any special meanings such as people coming back from the dead. It means simply a raising up. So, the objection that Paul referred to a special case of coming back from the dead when he said first fruits of the dead, or that the word resurrection meant specifically a rising from the dead into a permanent state of life, has now been thoroughly and completely dismantled. Firstborn from the dead means exactly that. Of all those who had died, Jesus was believed to have been the first to come back to life. Not only that, but he was believed to be the first in everything, which only makes sense if he was crucified around the time the world was created. And the riddle that Orthodox Christianity could not answer for 1900 years, how that Jesus could be the first person to come back from the dead if he raised two people from the dead himself, has now been answered. We went looking for support and found 3 early Christians tell us point blank that Jesus was the first to rise from the dead, another puzzle piece that fits snugly into the big picture of the Jesus myth theory. We've just seen an amazing piece of evidence that supports the Jesus myth theory. We've also answered a riddle that has perplexed Orthodox Christianity for the last 1900 years. We've answered the riddle of how Jesus could be the first person to be raised from the dead, because the Gospels tell us he wasn't. Well, now we know there are 2 distinct strands of Christianity. The Jerusalem tradition, the Christianity of Paul and the early apostles, and the Galilean tradition, the gospel version that came along later. And we've seen 3 different early Christian writers, Paul, the author of Colossians, and the author of 1 Clement, all tell us explicitly that Jesus was in fact raised from the dead before anyone else. Firstborn from the dead, first fruits of the dead. I don't think there can be any doubt about it at this point. And we've also dismantled the objection that the resurrection was something special. In fact, the Greek word anastasis simply meant a rising. It had nothing to do with the dead, and it had nothing to do with a state of being permanently risen from the dead. In the next video, we are going to answer the question of who killed Jesus. We've already seen evidence to support the idea of when Jesus was killed. Now we need to answer the question of who killed him. If he was never on earth to begin with, then who killed Jesus? We'll find out in the next video. See you then.